The universe operates on principles Starfleet spent centuries cataloging: physics, chemistry, the elegant mathematics of orbital mechanics, gravity wells, and stellar cartography. Every object in space follows rules: predictable, measurable, reproducible under laboratory conditions. When something violated those rules, science demanded an explanation. When something violated those rules and kept moving, science demanded humility. It was Lieutenant Uhura who heard it first. Not a distress call. Not a standard Federation hailing frequency. Something older. A radio transmission, narrow band, cycling through emergency protocols that predated the United Earth government by nearly a century. The signal was weak, Doppler stretched across an impossible distance, but the language was unmistakable. English. Technical. Her clipped with a particular cadence of people accustomed to crisis. "Captain?" Uhura turned from her station, and the expression on her face stopped James Kirk mid-stride across the bridge of the USS Enterprise. In 3 years of deep space exploration, he had learned to read her the way old sailors read weather. "You need to hear this." He heard it. 30 seconds of repeating emergency broadcast, automated and patient, announcing the survival status of something called Moonbase Alpha and requesting assistance from any vessel within range. The voice was calm in the way that only people beyond panic ever become calm, worn smooth by years of emergency, like river stones. Kirk looked at Spock. Spock was already at his scanner, fingers moving with characteristic precision. "Fascinating," he said, which from Spock carried the weight of profanity from anyone else. "Captain, I am detecting a large natural body on approach bearing 314 Mark 7. Mass consistent with a Class D planetoid. Diameter approximately 3,400 kilometers. Sulu straightened at the helm. That's roughly the size of Earth's moon, sir." "Precisely the size," Spock confirmed. "In fact, the geological composition is an exact match for lunar regolith, aluminum silicate, anorthosite, basaltic mare deposits." A pause that, from Spock, constituted genuine hesitation. "Captain, all sensor evidence suggests that this object is Earth's moon." The bridge went quiet in the particular way that starship bridges go quiet when the universe has just said something nobody has a framework to process. Kirk felt the familiar tightening in his chest. Not fear, never quite fear, but the sharp alertness of a man who understood that the next few hours would require everything he had. "That's impossible," Chekhov said. "And yet," Spock replied. Kirk moved to the view screen. "Magnify." The image resolved, and there it was. Gray and ancient and unmistakable, cratered and scarred exactly as every Earth child learned in their first astronomy lesson. The moon, Sol's moon. 384,000 kilometers from Earth under normal circumstances, currently drifting through Federation deep space, approximately 14 light-years from the solar system it had orbited for 4.5 billion years, broadcasting a distress call in 20th century radio frequencies. On its surface, catching starlight along the edge of the Sea of Tranquility, the geometric precision of constructed structures, domes, antennae, landing pads. And on those pads, the angular silhouettes of spacecraft unlike anything in the Federation registry. Thick-bodied, utilitarian, built for function over elegance, wings canted forward like birds of prey at rest. "Life signs?" Kirk asked. 311 human life signs, Spock said, plus one non-human biosignature of unclassified origin, all located within the pressurized sections of the surface installation. Another pause. "Captain, the human life signs are consistent with late 20th century Earth baseline physiology. No genetic markers consistent with 23rd century human evolution." Kirk absorbed that. Late 20th century. It meaning these people, if they were who the signal suggested, were not contemporaries. They were, by any rational measure, historical figures who should not exist in this century, in this place, broadcasting distress calls on equipment that belonged in a museum. "Open a channel," he said. Uhura's hands moved. "Channel open, Captain." Kirk straightened in his chair, that particular straightening, unconscious and instinctive, that his crew recognized as the moment James Kirk stopped thinking and started being a captain. "Moonbase Alpha, this is Captain James T. Kirk of the Federation Starship Enterprise. We have received your distress signal and are approaching your position. Please respond." Static. The cycling emergency broadcast continued uninterrupted for 11 seconds. Then it stopped, and a voice came back. Not automated, not a recording. A man's voice, controlled and cautious and carrying the unmistakable weight of someone who had been disappointed by the universe often enough to be careful about hope. Enterprise, this is Commander John Koenig, commanding Moonbase Alpha. We're receiving you. A beat. Before we go any further, I need to know who you are. Not your name, not your ship, who you are. Because we've been out here for 3 years, and the last time someone hailed us with good news, it cost us 11 lives. Kirk glanced at Spock. Spock raised an eyebrow. Kirk leaned forward. Commander Koenig, I understand caution. I'd like the chance to explain what the Federation is and what we can offer. But I'd rather do that in person, if you'll allow it. Another silence. Longer this time. Kirk could hear, faintly beneath the carrier wave, one of the ambient sounds of a working installation, distant alarms cycling down, the murmur of voices, the particular hum of life support machinery running at its limits. Come ahead, Captain. Koenig's voice was neither warm nor hostile. It was the voice of a man who had learned to evaluate everything before committing to anything. But come alone and understand something before you beam down, or however it is you people travel. Moonbase Alpha is not a Federation installation. It is not a colony, a protectorate, or a rescue waiting to happen. Whatever conversation we have begins and ends on that understanding. Kirk smiled, the small, private smile that Spock had catalogued over 3 years as the expression the captain wore when a problem became genuinely interesting. Understood. War Commander. He cut the channel and rose from the command chair. Spock, you're with me? Bones. Already packing my bag, McCoy called from the turbolift door, bag in hand, expression somewhere between curiosity and deep personal offense at the entire situation. A moon, a whole moon, just wandering around. I went into medicine to help people, not to have anxiety attacks about orbital mechanics. Noted, Kirk said. Let's go meet the man who commands one. If you want to see more characters enter the Star Trek universe, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character you'd want to see in the comments below. Live long and prosper. The transporter room of the Enterprise deposited 3 men onto the surface of the moon, and for a moment none of them spoke. Kirk had stood on alien worlds that defied description, methane plains under orange skies, crystalline forests that sang in subsonic frequencies, oceans of liquid ammonia beneath stars no human eye had ever catalogued. He had beamed into Klingon ships, Romulan installations, and at least one location he was fairly certain existed outside normal spacetime. He was not, by any reasonable measure, a man easily impressed by environment. But this was the moon, the same moon that hung over every human childhood, over every campfire and rooftop and hospital window, where someone had looked up and felt small and comforted simultaneously. The same moon that Armstrong had walked, that poets had addressed for millennia, that sailors had navigated by since before recorded history. Standing on it, inside a pressurized corridor of Moonbase Alpha, a gray regolith visible through reinforced viewport panels, Earth's sun, a distant but recognizable star, produced a disorientation that Kirk suspected no amount of Starfleet training could fully prepare a person for. Remarkable, Spock said quietly, and Kirk understood that Spock was not commenting on the base itself. McCoy said nothing. He was looking out the viewport with an expression Kirk recognized. The doctor's particular brand of sentiment, held carefully in check by professionalism. The reception party was small, 3 people, which Kirk read immediately as a deliberate choice. Koenig was not performing strength, but he wasn't showing vulnerability either. 3 was a number that said, we are serious, we are organized, and we have thought about this. Commander John Koenig stood at the center. Kirk had half expected someone worn down by 3 years of cosmic wandering. Gaunt, desperate, the hollowed look of a man running on fumes and willpower. What he found instead was a man who looked like he had been made by those 3 years. Koenig was lean and straight-backed, perhaps 40, with dark eyes that performed a rapid and thorough assessment of Kirk, Spock, and McCoy in approximately 2 seconds. He wore a white uniform with the utilitarian precision of someone who had long since stopped thinking about clothes and started thinking only about function. There were lines on his face that hadn't been put there by age alone. Beside him stood a woman, Dr. Helena Russell, Kirk would learn, with a calm, measured presence and the particular stillness of a physician who had learned to keep her own counsel in crisis. She held a medical scanning device that bore almost no resemblance to a tricorder, but was clearly performing the same function, and she did not bother disguising the fact that she was using it. The third figure made Spock go very still. She was young, mid-20s by appearance, with dark hair and large, striking eyes that held an alertness beyond ordinary human range. She stood slightly apart from Koenig and Russell in the way that people stand when they are accustomed to being the variable in any equation, the factor that changes calculations. She was watching Spock with an expression of open, unguarded scientific curiosity that mirrored his own precisely. "Commander Koenig," Kirk said, stepping forward with his hand extended, "thank you for seeing us." Koenig looked at the hand for a fraction of a second, not rudely, but with the consideration of a man who understood that a handshake was also a statement, and then shook it. His grip was firm without performance. "Captain Kirk," he nodded toward his companions, "Dr. Helena Russell, our chief medical officer, and Maya from the planet Psychon." "Maya," Spock said, and something in his tone caused McCoy to glance at him sharply. The young woman, Maya, tilted her head with that precise, curious alertness. "You're Vulcan," she said. It was not a question. "I am half Vulcan," Spock replied. "I find myself curious about your biosignature, which our sensors were unable to classify." "I find myself curious about your sensors," Maya replied with the faintest suggestion of a smile. Koenig watched this exchange with the practiced eye of a commander who had learned that how people met each other told him more than anything they subsequently said. Then he turned back to Kirk. "You said you wanted to explain what the Federation is. I'm listening." Kirk had given first contact speeches before, in various forms, on various worlds. He had learned to calibrate them, shorter for warrior cultures, more philosophical for spiritual ones, more technical for scientifically advanced civilizations. For Koenig, he made it as direct as he knew how. He explained the United Federation of Planets, its founding, its principles, its reach. He described Starfleet's mandate, exploration, peacekeeping, the prime directive. He gave dates and context. When watching Koenig's face as the commander absorbed the information that nearly 300 years had passed since Moonbase Alpha's era, that Earth, the Earth they had been separated from, had in the intervening centuries become something almost unrecognizable in scale and possibility. Koenig listened without interrupting. Russell made occasional notes. Maya watched Spock. When Kirk finished, Koenig was quiet for a moment. Then, "So Earth is well." "Earth is well," Kirk confirmed. Something moved across Koenig's face, swift and private and quickly controlled. Relief, Kirk thought. The particular relief of a man who had carried a weight so long he had forgotten what it felt like not to carry it. Russell touched Koenig's arm briefly, and the gesture told Kirk a great deal about who these two people were to each other. "And what does the Federation want from us?" Koenig asked. "To help," Kirk said simply. "Define help." McCoy stirred. "Son, you've got 311 people living on a moon with no fixed orbit, limited resources, and life support that—" He glanced at Russell, who met his eyes steadily. "That I'm guessing is running well below optimal. Help means getting your people somewhere safe, somewhere with fresh air and solid ground, and food that doesn't come from a recycler." Koenig looked at McCoy for a long moment. "Dr. Russell." "Life support is at 63% capacity," Russell said, with the directness of a physician who had learned that softening data helped no one. "Food stores for approximately 8 months at current rationing. Medical supplies critically low in 7 categories." She paused. "The doctor is not wrong about our situation." "No," Koenig agreed. "He's not." He turned back to Kirk, and the relief that had briefly surfaced was gone, replaced by something harder and more considered. "But here's what I need you to understand, Captain, before this conversation goes any further. We have been out here for 3 years. In that time, we've encountered civilizations that offered us paradise and delivered catastrophe. We've been promised rescue by beings whose definition of rescue bore no resemblance to ours. We've lost people, good people, to choices that seemed rational at the time." He held Kirk's gaze without aggression, but without yielding. "Moonbase Alpha is not a problem to be solved by the Federation. It is a community, my community. And any conversation about our future begins with that fact on the table." Kirk studied him. The bridge of the Enterprise was a long way away, and in its absence he felt the particular clarity that came from standing in a place where rank meant nothing and character meant everything. "Noted, Commander," he said, "and respected." Koenig held his gaze for another beat. Then something in his posture shifted, not softening exactly, but adjusting. The way a door doesn't open, but unlocks. "Victor will want to talk to your science officer," he said. "He's been waiting for someone to talk to for 3 years." Professor Victor Bergman's quarters were less a living space than a controlled explosion of scientific inquiry. Charts covered every available surface, hand-drawn trajectory calculations layered over printed astronomical maps, and annotated in 3 colors of ink with the particular obsessive density of a man who had been working the same problem from every conceivable angle for years without resolution. Data tapes were stacked in columns that followed some organizational logic visible only to their architect. A chalkboard, an actual chalkboard, the kind that existed in 23rd century Federation space only in historical holo recordings, dominated the far wall, covered in equations that Spock moved toward with the involuntary pull of a compass needle finding north. Bergman himself rose from behind his desk with the enthusiasm of a man who had been starving for precisely this conversation. He was older than Koenig, white-haired and broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that suggested he had spent decades looking at the universe with uncomplicated delight and found, despite everything, that he still could. He shook Spock's hand with both of his. "A Vulcan," he said. "Extraordinary. Helena told me about you. Well, she told me there was a non-human biosignature, which rather sent my mind racing." He was already gesturing toward the chalkboard. "I have approximately 400 questions, but I suspect you prefer to start with the mathematics." "I would," Spock said, and the two of them moved to the board with the wordless synchronicity of scientists who recognize a peer, leaving Kirk and McCoy standing in the middle of the room like guests at a party where they didn't speak the language. McCoy leaned toward Kirk. "Sure, and I feel like I've just become invisible." "Get used to it," Kirk said quietly, and turned his attention to Koenig, who had followed them in and now stood with his arms folded, watching Bergman and Spock with an expression of genuine affection threaded through with something more complicated. "Victor has been carrying those equations alone for 2 years," Koenig said, without being asked. "Since our last mathematician died." A pause. "We've lost 47 people since Breakaway." "Breakaway," Kirk said. "September 13th, 1999, the day the moon left Earth's orbit." Koenig's voice was level, factual, the voice of a man who had told this story enough times that the telling no longer destroyed him, even if the remembering still did. "Nuclear waste disposal areas on the far side. A magnetic flux chain reaction. The explosion was..." He stopped, chose a different word than whatever had come first. "Sufficient." Kirk said nothing. In his experience, the right response to certain kinds of loss was simply to receive it without comment. At the chalkboard, Bergman was talking rapidly, tracing orbital calculations with his finger. "The trajectory defies every model I've been able to construct," he was saying to Spock. "By conventional physics, we should have been captured by Jupiter's gravity well within the first month. Instead, we accelerated beyond any propulsive explanation, passed through the solar system's heliopause, and entered interstellar space on a course that appears, and I acknowledge how this sounds, to be chosen." Spock examined the equations with the focused intensity he reserved for things that genuinely challenged him. "When your mathematics are sound," he said, which from Spock was not a courtesy but an assessment. "The trajectory anomalies you've identified are consistent with what Federation science classifies as a spatial displacement event. However, the cause column in your model is blank." "Because I don't have a cause," Bergman said. "I have 3 years of effects and no cause, which is, I'll admit, somewhat maddening for a physicist." "Indeed." Spock picked up a piece of chalk. Kirk noted that he did so without any self-consciousness about the anachronistic medium, and began adding to Bergman's equations. "In the past decade, Federation science has cataloged 17 spatial phenomena capable of imparting non-Newtonian velocity to large bodies. Of these, 3 are consistent with your documented trajectory shifts." He wrote 3 designations on the board. "However, none of them adequately explain the apparent intentionality of the course corrections." Bergman stared at the board. "You see it too," he said quietly. "I observe the mathematical pattern," Spock replied carefully. "I make no metaphysical interpretation." Of course not. You're a Vulcan. Bergman smiled. I, however, am not, and I've watched this moon turn away from destruction with what I can only describe as purpose, on 11 separate documented occasions. Whatever is moving us, Mr. Spock, it is not random. Across the room, Kirk filed that away and turned back to Koenig. How much does your crew know about the situation? About where you are? What you're facing? Everything, Koenig said immediately. Someone in the immediacy itself was the answer. I made that decision in the first week. They're not passengers, Captain. They're the people I rely on to keep 311 human beings alive. They deserve the truth. Kirk nodded slowly. It was, he reflected, the decision he would have made. Starfleet Command is going to want to speak with you directly. Admiral Koenig, Starfleet Command has no jurisdiction over Moonbase Alpha. The words were quiet and absolute, and they landed in the conversation like a bulkhead door closing. Kirk looked at Koenig carefully. You'd be refusing the support of the most powerful interstellar organization in this quadrant. I'd be maintaining the integrity of my command, Koenig said, in which is something I suspect you understand better than most Starfleet captains would like to admit. He held Kirk's gaze with a directness that was not hostile, but entirely immovable. We've been a sovereign installation since 1999, Captain. We've made our own decisions, answered to our own ethics, buried our own dead. I'm not handing that over to an admiral who's never left a star system in crisis. McCoy, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, spoke up. Commander, with respect, sovereignty is a fine principle when your life support is at 100%. Koenig turned to him. And what would you suggest, Doctor? We dissolve Moonbase Alpha? Scatter my people across Federation colonies and call it rescue? He shook his head. Sort of, these people have survived things that would have broken a conventional military installation inside 6 months. They survived because they stayed together, stayed unified, stayed alpha. The moment I accept Federation authority over this base, I am telling every person here that everything they endured to preserve it meant nothing. The room was quiet except for the soft scratch of Spock's chalk and the distant, ever-present hum of life support. Kirk looked at the man across from him. This commander from another century, another world, who had held 311 people together through the void with nothing but will and principle, and felt something that was not quite agreement and not quite disagreement, but the more uncomfortable third thing that existed between them. Understanding. Ina, then let's talk about what cooperation looks like without authority, Kirk said. Koenig studied him for a long moment. Then, for the first time since they had met, something in his expression moved toward something that might eventually become trust. Sit down, Captain, he said. The conversation lasted 4 hours. Kirk had conducted negotiations with Klingon warlords, Romulan commanders, and at least one entity that existed as pure electromagnetic thought. He had brokered ceasefires between civilizations that had been killing each other for centuries, and talked his way out of situations where talking was, by any rational assessment, insufficient. He was good at it, not because he was naturally diplomatic in the Vulcan sense, but because he genuinely cared about the people across the table from him, and people, in Kirk's experience, he could always tell the difference. Koenig was harder than most, not hostile, not irrational, harder in the way that good steel is harder than soft iron, more resistant to bending precisely because the bending process had already happened, under pressures that would have destroyed lesser material. Every position Koenig held was a position he had arrived at through experience that Kirk could respect, even when he disagreed with the conclusion. They established, by the end of the second hour, a working framework. The Enterprise would provide medical supplies. McCoy and Russell had retreated to Alpha's medical center within the first 30 minutes and were apparently engaged in a professional exchange that had already transcended the language barrier of 2 centuries of medical advancement. And the Enterprise would also provide food stores and technical consultation on life support systems. In exchange, Alpha would share complete records of its 3-year journey. Every alien contact, every spatial anomaly, every trajectory shift that Bergman had documented. What the Enterprise would not provide, and what Koenig made unmistakably clear, was Federation authority over Moonbase Alpha's command structure, personnel decisions, or future course. The moon is still moving, Koenig said during the 3rd hour, over what passed for coffee in Alpha's commissary. A dark, slightly bitter approximation that tasted of long supply chains and careful rationing. Whatever force Bergman believes is guiding us, it hasn't stopped. We've been decelerating since entering this region of space, but our trajectory models suggest we'll be moving again within 72 hours. Kirk set down his cup. Moving where? That's what Bergman and your science officer are trying to determine. Koenig looked at him steadily. Which is why I need you to understand something about our situation that goes beyond supply manifests in diplomatic frameworks. We don't choose our destinations, Captain. They are chosen for us. We arrive somewhere, we survive it or we don't, and then we move on. The Federation's offer of resettlement assumes we have the ability to simply stop. We may not. Kirk absorbed this. You're saying the moon itself is the variable, not your decisions. I'm saying both are the variable. Koenig leaned forward slightly. My decisions determine whether my people survive what the moon takes us into. But the moon decides where we go. A pause. 3 years ago, that would have sounded like madness to me. Now it sounds like a Tuesday. Kirk almost smiled. Almost. Has it ever taken you somewhere good? Something shifted in Koenig's expression. Not quite warmth, but the memory of it. Once or twice, he said quietly. Worlds that were extraordinary. People who were... He stopped. Started again. We've seen things, Captain, that your Federation's catalogs don't contain. Things that suggest the universe is considerably stranger and more purposeful than either of our scientific frameworks account for. Spock would debate the purposeful part. Your Dr. McCoy wouldn't. Koenig said it without particular humor, as a simple observation, and Kirk found that he was right. It was Maya who changed the temperature of the afternoon. She arrived at the commissary door with the particular quality of stillness that Kirk had been noticing since they landed. That sense of a person who occupies space differently than humans do, more deliberately, more aware of the geometry of a room. She addressed Koenig directly. Commander, Mr. Spock requests that you and Captain Kirk come to the technical section. A beat. He says it's urgent. He used the word urgent, which Professor Bergman says is unusual for a Vulcan. It is, Kirk confirmed, and was already standing. The technical section was Alpha's equivalent of a science laboratory and operations center combined. Banks of monitors, sensor equipment that blended 20th century engineering with modifications that spoke of 3 years of improvised advancement. And Victor Bergman standing at the center of it looking like a man who had just received news that was simultaneously wonderful and catastrophic. Spock stood at a sensor display, hands behind his back, with the expression Kirk had learned to read as, I have found something significant and I am choosing my words carefully because the wrong ones will cause unnecessary alarm. Report, Kirk said. I have completed an analysis of the trajectory data Professor Bergman has compiled over 3 years, cross-referenced with Federation stellar cartographic records and our current long-range sensor sweeps. Spock indicated the central display where a 3-dimensional star map showed a dotted line, the moon's path, threading between star systems with an elegance that was, Kirk had to admit, difficult to attribute entirely to coincidence. When the moon's course, when plotted in its entirety, describes a pattern consistent with gravitational slingshot mechanics around specific stellar bodies. However, the selection of those stellar bodies is not random. Bergman picked up the thread with barely contained agitation. The moon has been threading a path between systems. Every course correction, every apparent impossibility in the trajectory, it's been avoiding populated star systems, Captain. Every civilization we've encountered has been at the edges of inhabited space. The moon has been moving through the gaps. As if it knows where not to go, Kirk said slowly. As if it knows exactly where to go, Bergman corrected, which implies a navigational intelligence of extraordinary sophistication. Something is guiding this moon with a precision that makes our warp navigation computers look primitive. Kirk turned to Spock. Your assessment. The pattern is undeniable, Spock said. The probability of achieving this specific trajectory through random spatial mechanics is approximately 1 in 4.7 trillion. He paused. I do not use the word impossible lightly, Captain, but I find I must use the word directed. The room processed that. Koenig stood very still, and Kirk understood that this was not new information for him, that he had suspected this, perhaps known it in some way that preceded mathematical proof, for longer than he had been willing to say aloud. Confirmation was not relief. Confirmation was its own particular weight. Something is navigating your moon, Kirk said to Koenig. Yes, Koenig said. Error, and you don't know what. No. A pause. But it hasn't killed us yet. Given what's out here, I've learned to count that as a relationship worth maintaining. Before Kirk could respond, the comm system crackled. Alpha's equivalent, a wall-mounted speaker with the fidelity of a generation past. The voice that came through belonged to Alpha's command center, and it carried the controlled urgency of trained personnel delivering bad news at speed. Commander Koenig, long-range scanners have picked up a vessel on approach. Configuration doesn't match the Enterprise. A fractional hesitation that told Kirk everything about what was coming next. It matches Klingon battlecruiser configuration, sir. D7 class. They're hailing us. The silence that followed lasted exactly 2 seconds. Then Koenig turned to Kirk with an expression that had shed every diplomatic nuance and reduced itself to a single direct question. Friend or enemy, Captain? Kirk's jaw tightened. Complicated, he said, which out here means enemy until proven otherwise. The Klingon commander's name was Karg, and he had the particular quality of stillness that distinguished genuinely dangerous men from merely aggressive ones. His image filled Alpha's main communication screen. Broad-featured, dark-eyed, with the ridged forehead of a Klingon warrior in his prime, and the expression of a man who had spent considerable time calculating the value of everything he looked at. He wore his uniform with the ease of someone who had never needed to think about authority, because authority had always simply been his. Behind him, the bridge of the IKS Takadev was organized with Klingon efficiency. Purposeful, martial, every station occupied by crew who were watching their commander with the focused attention of people who understood that what happened in the next few minutes would define the shape of everything that followed. He looked at the communication screen, at Koenig, who had taken the central position with Kirk deliberately one step to his left, a placement Kirk recognized as both tactically sound and diplomatically pointed, and said nothing for 4 seconds. Then, "You are not Federation." "No," Koenig said. "Your installation is on a moving body with no drive capability and no tactical profile in any database." Karg's eyes moved to Kirk. "Yet a Federation starship sits at your perimeter. This requires explanation." "Commander Karg," Kirk stepped forward slightly, not in front of Koenig, but visible, present, establishing his position in the conversation. "I'm Captain James Kirk of the USS Enterprise. Moonbase Alpha is under," he chose the word carefully, "the protection of Federation interests." It was technically not a lie. It was also not precisely what Koenig and he had agreed to, and he felt rather than saw Koenig's slight tension at his left side. Karg studied Kirk with the flat assessment of a predator deciding whether prey was worth the energy expenditure. "Kirk," he said, as if tasting the name, "I have heard of you." He said it the way Klingons said things they considered relevant data, without inflection, which in Klingon communication was itself a statement. The question is not Federation interest, the captain. The question is what that installation represents. It represents 311 human beings who, "It represents a moon," Karg said, with the precision of a man who had no patience for circumlocution. 3,400 kilometers in diameter, sufficient mass to destabilize the orbital mechanics of any inhabited system it approaches. Capable, with appropriate modification, of serving as a weapons platform of considerable strategic value. His eyes moved back to Koenig. "Who commands this body?" "I do," Koenig said. "Then I address you." Karg's attention fixed on Koenig with the complete, undivided quality of a targeting system achieving lock. The Klingon Empire has strategic interests in this sector. A body of this mass, on this trajectory, will pass within 4 light years of 2 Klingon colony worlds within the next standard month. The Empire requires assurance that this passage will not be used as a tactical maneuver by Federation forces. "Moonbase Alpha is not a Federation installation," Koenig said, and there was something almost satisfying about watching him deploy those words against a target other than Kirk. "We have no political affiliation. We are survivors of an accident that occurred in Earth's solar system in 1999. We are not a weapon, and we are not a tactical maneuver." Karg was quiet for a moment. Then, 1999. "Yes." Another silence, shorter. "You claim to be from Earth's past." "I don't claim it. It's a fact." Kirk watched Karg process this with a particular quality of attention that Klingons brought to unexpected information. Not dismissal, it's not credulity, but the rapid recalibration of a strategic mind absorbing a variable it hadn't accounted for. Klingons were, in Kirk's experience, many things. Stupid was not among them. Then you have no loyalty to the Federation, Karg said. We have no loyalty to any political body in this century, Koenig said carefully, including the Klingon Empire. A sovereign position. Yes. Karg leaned back slightly. A small movement that on a Klingon commander constituted a significant postural shift. There is honor in sovereignty, he said. The Empire respects those who stand for themselves. His gaze moved to Kirk with something that was not quite contempt, but was certainly not warmth. Unlike those who stand behind Federation protection, they have not earned. Kirk kept his expression neutral. The Federation protection offer stands, Commander Koenig. As does the Empire's interest in your situation, Karg said. I will contact the High Council. In the meantime, his eyes returned to Koenig. I request permission to send a vessel to your installation, an observer, to verify your claims of neutrality. The air in Alpha's technical section tightened perceptibly. Koenig didn't look at Kirk. Didn't need to. I'll consider the request, he said. I'll also consider the Federation's equivalent request, which I expect is forthcoming. A beat. Moonbase Alpha does not currently welcome armed personnel from any faction aboard this installation. If that changes, you'll be notified. Karg regarded him for a long moment with an expression that Kirk, who had dealt with Klingons for years, read as the beginning of respect. The grudging, evaluative kind that Klingons extended to people who met them without flinching. Acceptable, Karg said. The channel closed. The room exhaled. Koenig turned to Kirk immediately. Federation protection interests? It kept him from making a tactical calculation about whether to fire on Alpha in the next 30 seconds, Kirk said, which, given that his sensors have just told him you have no shields and no warp drive, was a real possibility. Koenig held his gaze for a beat. Don't speak for Alpha again without my authorization. Understood. Kirk said it without apology and without defensiveness, which was the only register Koenig would respect. But you need to understand something about Karg. He's not going to accept neutrality indefinitely. The Klingon Empire doesn't have a framework for neutral objects of strategic value. Eventually, he's going to present you with a choice. He's not the first to do that, Koenig said. No, but the others presumably didn't have a D7 battlecruiser. From the doorway, Maya spoke quietly. There's something else. She was looking at the sensor display, where long-range readings were still populating from the ongoing scan. Her expression had the particular quality of careful neutrality that Kirk had come to understand, meant she was managing information she didn't yet want to deliver. The Klingon vessel isn't alone. There's a second ship, much smaller, holding position at the edge of sensor range. She looked up. It's been there since before the Klingons arrived. It was there when the Enterprise arrived. It was there, according to our logs, since approximately 6 hours before we detected the Enterprise. The implications settled over the room like a weather change. Someone was waiting for us, Kirk said. Someone was waiting for something, Bergman corrected from his station, with the precision of a man who had learned that assumptions were expensive. Whether it was us specifically, he looked at his instruments. I can't say, but that vessel has made no aggressive move, sent no communication, and maintained its distance with extraordinary precision, as if it knows exactly how close it can come without being noticed. McCoy, who had appeared in the doorway behind Maya, with the slightly distracted expression of a man who had spent 3 hours in a medical facility learning things that disturbed him professionally, said, I don't suppose it's anything friendly. In my experience, Koenig said, vessels that hide and watch are never delivering good news. Kirk was already moving toward the comm panel. I need to get back to the Enterprise. He looked at Koenig. With your permission. Koenig nodded once. Captain. Kirk paused. Whatever that ship is, the answer to it is the same as the answer to Karg. Alpha handles its own affairs. Then Alpha should know, Kirk said carefully, that in this century affairs have a tendency to become collective very quickly. He held Koenig's gaze for a moment. I'll be in touch. He tapped his communicator. Kirk to Enterprise. 3 to beam up. As the transporter took him, the last thing he saw was Koenig turning back to the sensor display, arms folded, watching the small patient. In a hidden vessel at the edge of range with the expression of a man who had learned that the universe's surprises were rarely the comfortable kind. The mystery vessel resolved on the Enterprise's main view screen after 40 minutes of careful sensor work by Spock, and what it revealed produced a silence on the bridge that Kirk had learned to classify by quality. This was the silence of genuine surprise. "Romulan," Chekhov said, almost involuntarily, and then caught himself and straightened at his station as if the word had escaped without permission. "Confirmed," Spock said from his science station. "A Romulan scout vessel, designation consistent with Tal Shiar intelligence configuration. Single occupant. Cloaking device currently inactive. They appear to have made a deliberate choice to be visible at this range, which suggests that they want us to know they're there without being close enough to force a response," Kirk finished. He was standing at the center of the bridge with his hands clasped behind his back, looking at the small, elegant, predatory shape on the view screen with the particular focus of a man recalibrating his understanding of a situation. "They've been watching since before we arrived. Approximately 9 hours before our arrival, based on residual ion trail analysis," Spock confirmed. "They were already in position when the moon's deceleration pattern brought it into this region of space." "Which means they knew it was coming," Uhura said from her station. "Which means they knew it was coming," Kirk agreed. He turned to Spock. "Any communication attempts?" "None directed at us." "Ew, however." Spock paused in the way he paused when the next sentence required particular precision. "I have detected a tight beam transmission sent from the scout vessel approximately 3 hours ago. Heavily encrypted. Romulan military cipher. Current generation." He looked up from his scanner. "The transmission was directed toward the Romulan neutral zone." Kirk absorbed that. The Romulan neutral zone, the buffer of empty space that separated Federation territory from the Romulan Star Empire, patrolled by both sides with the mutual wariness of powers that had fought one war and never fully stopped fighting it. A tight beam transmission toward the neutral zone meant a report. A report meant command interest. A command interest in a wandering moon with 311 survivors meant the Tal Shiar had assessed Moonbase Alpha as something worth reporting to people who made large decisions. "They're not here for us," Kirk said slowly. "They're here for the moon." "The strategic implications are considerable," Spock said. "A body of this mass on an unpredictable trajectory that cannot be conventionally tracked or anticipated is the perfect weapon," Kirk said, "or the perfect intelligence asset. A base that moves through space on a course nobody can predict, carrying personnel with 3 years of experience, making contact with civilizations the Federation has never encountered." He turned back to the view screen. "If the Tal Shiar gets aboard Alpha before we establish a proper relationship with Koenig..." "Commander Koenig has explicitly rejected Federation authority," Spock said, with the neutrality of a man presenting a fact rather than making an argument. "He's rejected Federation authority over his command structure," Kirk said. "He hasn't rejected Federation assistance. There's a difference, and right now, that difference matters." He moved to his command chair and sat. "Hail the Romulan vessel." Uhura's hands moved. A beat. 2. "No response, Captain." "Keep the channel open." Kirk looked at the view screen. "They'll respond when they're ready. They want something from this situation, which means they'll eventually want something from us." He tapped the comm panel on his armrest. "Kirk to Alpha." The response came quickly. Koenig's voice, alert and unsurprised. "Koenig here. Commander, the unidentified vessel is Romulan, Tal Shiar intelligence configuration. They've been in position since before either of us arrived, and they've already sent a report toward the neutral zone. I recommend..." "I know what you recommend," Koenig said. "I'd like to say it anyway." A brief pause. "Go ahead. Whatever the Romulans offer you, information, technology, safe passage, anything, it will come with conditions that aren't visible in the initial offer. The Tal Shiar doesn't make investments, it makes acquisitions." Kirk kept his voice level, without urgency, because urgency with Koenig would produce the opposite of the intended effect. "I'm not asking you to accept Federation authority. I'm asking you to be careful." Another pause, longer. "Appreciated," Koenig said. "Hi," and there was something in the word that was more than courtesy. "We've dealt with civilizations that made appealing offers before, Captain. We have a policy." "What's the policy?" "Listen to everything. Commit to nothing. Survive. The comm clicked off. McCoy appeared at Kirk's shoulder from the turbolift, a medical kit over his arm, and an expression that suggested his hours in Alpha's medical center had given him a great deal to think about. Jim, Helena Russell is one of the finest physicians I have encountered in 20 years of practice. He said it with the slightly pained admiration of a man whose professional pride was at war with his generosity. Their medical technology is primitive by our standards, but she has done things with limited resources that would embarrass half the doctors at Starfleet Medical. He set the kit down. She's also exhausted in a way that doesn't come from overwork. It comes from sustained crisis management over years. They all are. He lowered his voice. These people need rest, Jim. Real rest. The kind you can't get when you're waiting for the next catastrophe. I know, Bones. Knowing and doing something about it are different things, McCoy said. Koenig won't accept help that looks like charity. But Russell, she's practical. She understands the medical situation clearly. He picked up the kit again. I'd like to go back, if you can spare me. Go, Kirk said. But Bones, be careful what you promise them. I don't know yet what we can actually deliver. McCoy nodded and moved toward the turbolift. He paused at the door. That Maya, Asha the Psychon girl. His voice had shifted to the register he used for things that concerned him professionally. She showed me something when I was down there, a demonstration of her molecular transformation ability. He shook his head slowly. Jim, I've seen a lot of things in deep space. What she does, it's unlike anything in Federation xenobiology. Spock needs to know formally because the science is genuinely extraordinary. A beat. But she's also the loneliest person on that base. Possibly the loneliest person I've ever met. Last of her entire species, living among humans who care about her, but can't fully understand what she is. He held Kirk's gaze. Keep that in mind when Starfleet starts making assessments about her strategic value. The turbolift door closed behind him. Aaron and Kirk sat for a moment with McCoy's words settling into the calculus of an already complicated situation. Captain, Uhura turned from her station. The Romulan vessel is hailing us. Kirk straightened. On screen. The face that appeared was not what he expected. Not a military commander. Or not primarily. A woman, perhaps 50, with the angular features and controlled expression of a Romulan patrician, wearing civilian dress beneath a Tal Shiar intelligence insignia that she displayed with the ease of someone accustomed to being the most dangerous person in any room. Her eyes were sharp and appraising, and completely without the hostility that Kirk had learned to expect from Romulan first contacts. Captain Kirk, she said. Her standard was flawless, with the faint precision of someone who had learned it as a studied language rather than a native one. I am Sub-Commander Lavara. I appreciate your patience. Sub-Commander. Kirk kept his tone neutral. You've been watching for some time. We have. No apology in it, no defensiveness. The calm acknowledgement of someone who considered surveillance a professional courtesy rather than an act requiring justification. The object is remarkable. Its trajectory has been tracked by Romulan long-range sensors for 11 months. We have been attempting to determine its nature and origin. She tilted her head slightly. You appear to have made more progress in several hours than we achieved in 11 months. We had the advantage of being able to ask, Kirk said. Something that was not quite a smile moved across Lavara's face. Indeed. It was a Federation advantage. She folded her hands. I will be direct, Captain, because I find directness more efficient than the alternative. The Romulan Senate has an interest in Moonbase Alpha. Not a hostile interest. An intelligence interest. We wish to know where it has been and what it has encountered. She paused. 3 years of contacts with unknown civilizations represents an intelligence asset of considerable value. To the Romulan Empire, to any power with an interest in this galaxy's geography, she corrected smoothly, which includes the Federation. Commander Koenig has made his position on political affiliations clear, Kirk said. Commander Koenig's position is noted and respected, Lavara said. I am not asking for affiliation. I am proposing an exchange. Alpha's records of its journey, in exchange for Romulan stellar cartography of regions the Federation has never mapped. She let that sit for a moment. Regions that Alpha's trajectory suggests it may be heading toward. Kirk looked at her steadily. That's a significant offer. It is, she agreed, which should tell you something about how significant we consider Alpha's records to be. She unfolded her hands. I will make the same proposal directly to Commander Koenig. I inform you first as a professional courtesy. Another not-quite smile. We are not, after all, at war this week. The channel closed with Romulan efficiency, and Kirk sat in the particular silence of a situation that had just become considerably more complex. "Spock," he said. "Already analyzing the offer's strategic implications," Spock replied from his station. "The Romulan cartographic data, if genuine, would represent the most significant expansion of Federation stellar knowledge in 2 decades. A pause. It would also represent a Tal Shiar intelligence operation of considerable sophistication, designed to establish a relationship with Moonbase Alpha before the Federation can consolidate its own." "Koenig's going to find it appealing," Kirk said. "Romulan star maps of regions his moon might be heading into. That's exactly the kind of practical value he responds to." "Yes," Spock said, "which is precisely why Sub-Commander Lavera led with it." Kirk leaned back in his command chair and looked at the view screen, where the moon hung in space between the Enterprise and the distant shape of the Klingon battle cruiser, patient and ancient and moving, always moving, towards something none of them could yet see. 3 factions. 1 wandering moon, a commander who answered to none of them. The universe, Kirk reflected, had a gift for architecture. The incident began, as the most consequential incidents aboard starships often did, with something that appeared routine. An Eagle was conducting a standard perimeter sweep, Alpha's equivalent of a patrol, one of the angular workhorse spacecraft, moving in a broad arc around the moon's daylight terminator at low altitude, its pilot running sensor checks with the methodical patience of someone who had performed the same task hundreds of times. The pilot's name was Carter. Alan Carter, Alpha's chief Eagle pilot, who Kirk had not yet met but whose voice he was about to become very familiar with. The Eagle's sensors detected an anomaly in the regolith approximately 2 kilometers from Alpha's outer pressure dome. A metallic signature, small, precise, outsheet consistent with, and this was the word Carter used in his transmission to Alpha's command center, a word that arrived on the Enterprise's open monitoring frequency with the particular clarity of something nobody wanted to hear, consistent with a transporter residue pattern. Something had been beamed onto the moon's surface. Kirk was out of his command chair before Carter finished his report. "Spock, scanning." Spock's fingers moved with controlled urgency. "Confirmed. Transporter residue consistent with..." A fractional pause. "Romulan transporter technology. Single object deposited approximately 90 minutes ago, during the period when sensor attention was focused on the Klingon vessel's approach. Lavara beamed something down while we were watching Karg," Kirk said. "Where the timing is precise enough to suggest deliberate coordination," Spock said, "or at minimum, opportunistic exploitation of a tactical distraction." Kirk was already at the comm. "Kirk to Alpha, Commander Koenig." Koenig's response was immediate, which told Kirk he had been monitoring the same frequency. "I heard Carter's report. What did they put on my moon, Captain?" "We're trying to determine that. I'd like to beam down a security team." "Alpha security is already moving," Koenig said, and there was a quality in his voice that Kirk recognized as controlled anger of the specific variety that comes from feeling that one's space has been violated. "Carter is setting down near the anomaly now. I'm going out personally. Commander, if it's a Romulan intelligence device, then it's on my moon and I'll handle it." A beat. "Or you can watch from orbit, Captain." The channel closed. Kirk looked at Spock. Spock looked at Kirk. The wordless exchange contained, between 2 people who knew each other well, an entire conversation about command authority, tactical prudence, and the specific frustration of dealing with someone whose independence you respected, but whose safety you were concerned about. "Prepare a security team," Kirk said. "Full equipment. We go if he asks or if the situation deteriorates." "Understood," Spock said, and moved toward the turbolift with Lieutenant Commander Jodo without further instruction. On the open channel, they listened. Carter's voice, calm and professional in the way of test pilots, people who had been trained to describe emergencies without performing them. "Commander, I'm at the site. The object is approximately 30 centimeters in diameter. Spherical, metallic casing with..." A pause. "With what appears to be an active power signature." Koenig's voice, closer now, slightly breathless from moving in Alpha's partial gravity. "Don't touch it. Maya, are you on comm?" Maya's voice. "Here, Commander." "Can you determine what it is from a safe distance?" A longer pause. When Maya spoke again, her voice had the careful quality of someone processing information That was both technically interesting and personally alarming. It's a surveillance device, Romulan manufacture. I'm cross-referencing with the information Mr. Spock shared about Federation alien technology classifications. Another pause. It's not just passive surveillance. There's a secondary function. The power signature suggests... She stopped. Why, Maya, Koenig said. It's a transporter beacon, she said. A very sophisticated one. It's designed to lock onto multiple biosignatures within a defined radius and provide a transporter lock that bypasses standard interference from the moon's mineral composition. Her voice remained steady with visible effort. Commander, if activated, it could beam selected personnel directly to the Romulan vessel. The bridge of the Enterprise went very quiet. They were going to take people, Uhura said softly. Selected personnel, Kirk said, and the weight of the word selected pressed down on the conversation. He thought of McCoy's words from earlier, about Maya's molecular transformation ability, about Spock's fascination, about the Tal Shiar's interest in Alpha's records. He thought of Victor Bergman and 3 years of unique stellar data. He thought of what a Romulan intelligence service would consider the most valuable assets on a wandering moon. Kirk to Alpha, he said. Commander, I need you to hear something. I'm listening. Koenig's voice was tight. The beacon is designed for selective targeting, specific biosignatures. The Tal Shiar doesn't grab everyone. They identify who they want before they move. He kept his voice measured, which means they've already done the analysis. They know who's aboard Alpha, and they've already decided who's worth taking. A silence that felt different from the others. Harder, with a specific gravity. Maya, Koenig said. Possibly, Maya said, with the composure of someone who had long since learned to assess threats to herself with clinical detachment, because the alternative was paralysis. Also Professor Bergman. The stellar cartography data is stored in his personal research files. A beat. And possibly you, Commander. A command-level capture would have considerable intelligence value. Destroy the device, Koenig said immediately. Commander. Spock's voice, calm and precise, came over the channel. He had taken a communicator feed from the security staging area. Before destruction, I would strongly recommend allowing me to examine and record the device's technical specifications. Romulan transporter technology of this sophistication is unknown to Federation science. The intelligence value, Mr. Spock. Koenig's voice was not unkind, but it was absolute. That device was placed on my moon without authorization, designed to abduct my people. I understand its intelligence value to the Federation. I don't care. A pause. Error Carter. A sharp, precise sound. An alpha laser weapon discharging once, with the particular finality of a door being closed. Device destroyed, Carter reported. On the Enterprise bridge, Kirk let out a slow breath. He could feel Spock's restraint from across the room. The Vulcan equivalent of profound professional frustration contained behind a carefully neutral expression. Kirk to Sub-Commander Livara, Kirk said, turning to Uhura with a look that needed no words. She opened the channel. Livara appeared on screen with the same composed expression she had worn before, but something in her eyes had shifted. A recalibration, subtle and swift, of someone whose operation had just failed and was already constructing the next approach. Captain Kirk, she said, I suspect this is not a social call. You beamed a transporter beacon onto Moonbase Alpha, Kirk said, designed for selective abduction of specific personnel. A surveillance device, Livara said smoothly, intended to provide communication capability in the event that direct contact with Alpha proved difficult. Sub-Commander, Kirk kept his voice even. We both know what it was. Commander Koenig knows what it was. This conversation is a courtesy, not a debate. He leaned forward slightly. Alpha has destroyed the device. If another unauthorized object is detected on the moon's surface, I will consider it an act of aggression requiring a response. Are we clear? Livara regarded him for a long moment. Admirably direct, Captain. She tilted her head. One question. As you speak of Alpha's interest with considerable conviction for a commander whose authority over that installation has been explicitly rejected. A pause that was precisely as long as it needed to be. Does Commander Koenig know you're speaking on his behalf? Again? Kirk held her gaze without expression. The channel closed. Behind him, Uhura made a small sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite anything else. She's not wrong, Kirk said quietly, to nobody in particular. No, Spock agreed, returning to his station. She is not. However, she is also now aware that uninvited approaches to Moonbase Alpha will be observed and opposed. That limits her options considerably. He settled into his chair. Captain, the Klingon vessel has changed bearing. Our Commander Karg is moving toward a closer orbital position relative to the moon. Kirk turned to the view screen. Karg's battlecruiser was a dark shape against the stars, moving with the unhurried confidence of a vessel whose commander had decided that waiting was no longer his preferred posture. He watched us deal with Lavara, Kirk said. Now he's making his own calculation. A Klingon calculation, Spock confirmed, which historically involves fewer transporter beacons and more direct statements of intent. Open a channel to Alpha, Kirk said, and get me Commander Koenig. He looked at the view screen, the moon, the Klingon cruiser, the distant Romulan scout, and felt the situation crystallizing around a single inevitable point. 3 factions, 1 wandering moon, and a commander who had spent 3 years surviving the universe's worst surprises. The next surprise was already forming. Commander Karg did not use a transporter beacon. He used a direct channel, opened without request for permission, which was itself the statement. A Klingon's way of announcing that the negotiating phase of an interaction had concluded and something more immediate had begun. His face filled Alpha's main screen in the command center where Koenig stood with Carter beside him and Maya at the sensor station, and Bergman in the doorway, still holding a data tape he had been reviewing when the situation accelerated past academic interest. Commander Koenig, Karg said, I have reviewed the incident with the Romulan device. My sensors recorded the entire event. He said it without preamble, without diplomatic architecture. The Tal Shiar attempted to take your people. You destroyed their tool. This is the correct response. He paused, and the pause itself was structured. A Klingon allowing space for acknowledgement before continuing, which was, in its way, a form of respect. I now make a direct proposal. The Klingon Empire offers Moonbase Alpha formal protection status under the High Council's authority. Your installation would be recognized as a sovereign entity under Klingon guarantee. No power in this quadrant would dare move against you. Koenig stood very still. Kirk, listening on the open channel from the Enterprise, recognized what was happening with the particular clarity of someone who had spent years navigating Klingon political architecture. Karg was not offering charity, yet he was offering the most valuable currency in Klingon political vocabulary. The guarantee of the Empire's martial credibility extended over an entity that had demonstrated the specific quality Klingons respected above nearly all others: the willingness to destroy a threat without hesitation or bureaucratic consultation. Koenig had destroyed the Romulan device without asking anyone's permission. In Klingon assessment, that was the action of a commander worth protecting. What does the Empire want in exchange? Koenig asked. Karg's expression shifted slightly, the near-invisible adjustment of a Klingon who had expected to negotiate longer before reaching substance. Access to your records of the journey, specifically your contacts with unknown civilizations in uncharted space. The Empire is expanding. A knowledge of what lies ahead has strategic value. The same thing the Romulans wanted, Koenig said. The Romulans wanted to take it, Karg said. I am asking for it. It was, Kirk had to admit, a meaningful distinction. He opened a channel to Koenig's personal comm. A quiet line, separate from the main screen feed. Commander. Koenig's hand moved to his comm lock, the small personal communication device that Alpha personnel wore at their belts, without breaking eye contact with Karg's image. His voice dropped below the threshold of the main channel's pickup. I hear you, Captain. Karg is sincere in the offer, Kirk said quietly. Klingon protection guarantees are genuine. The High Council has never broken one. He paused. But accepting it changes what Alpha is. You become a recognized entity in Klingon political space. That has implications that extend well beyond this conversation. Everything has implications, Koenig said very quietly. Not all implications are equal. A beat. Then Koenig addressed Karg directly. I need time to consult my people, Commander. This is not a decision I make alone. Karg nodded, a single deliberate inclination that was the Klingon equivalent of a formal acknowledgement. 1 hour, he said. I will hold position. The channel closed. Koenig turned from the screen, and Kirk, watching through the open comm, saw the expression of a man doing the kind of mathematics that doesn't involve numbers. The calculus of obligation, survival, principle, and the specific weight of 311 people whose futures were contingent on whatever he decided in the next 60 minutes. "Victor," he said, and Bergman set down the data tape. "I heard. Your assessment." Bergman was quiet for a moment, the considered quiet of a man who had spent 3 years providing assessments that people's lives depended on and had learned to take the responsibility seriously. "The Klingon offer is tactically sound," he said. "Karg is right that formal protection status would deter both the Romulans and any other power with opportunistic intentions." He paused. "But John, we've been independent for 3 years. We've maintained it against considerably more exotic pressures than a Klingon commander with a direct manner. The moment we accept formal status under any political structure, we stop being alpha and start being an asset." "That's what I thought," Koenig said. "It doesn't mean the offer is wrong," Bergman continued carefully. "When it means we need to understand what we'd be trading." He glanced at his data tape. "There's also the trajectory question. If Bergman and Spock's analysis is correct, if the moon is being guided, then our destination may already be decided. Accepting political protection from a power that has interests in the regions we're heading toward could become considerably complicated depending on what we find there." Carter, who had been leaning against the wall with the contained stillness of a pilot waiting for a green light, spoke. "You know what they haven't asked? Either of them, the Romulans or the Klingons?" He pushed off the wall. "Whether we want to go home." The room absorbed that. "The Federation asked," Maya said quietly from the sensor station. She said it without inflection, but the observation carried weight. "The Federation asked and we said no," Koenig said. "We said we wouldn't accept Federation authority," Maya said. "That's not the same as saying no to going home." She looked at Koenig with the direct, careful attention that characterized everything she did. "John, the Enterprise has warp capability. If the moon's trajectory could be influenced, if Spock and Professor Bergman between them could identify the guiding force and find a way to interrupt it." "The moon goes where it goes, Maya," Koenig said, and there was something in the words that was not resignation, but was older than hope. "We used to say that," she replied, "before we knew something was guiding it." She held his gaze. "If it's being guided, it can be redirected." The silence that followed was of a different quality than any that had preceded it, charged with the particular energy of a possibility that had not been spoken aloud before, and could not, once spoken, be unspoken. Kirk chose this moment carefully. "Commander Koenig." Koenig looked at the comm lock. "Go ahead, Captain. I want to propose something that isn't about Federation authority or Klingon protection or Romulan intelligence interests." Kirk paused, assembling the words with the care they required. "Spock and Bergman have identified a guiding force. They haven't identified its source. If we can find the source, understand what's moving the moon and why, we might have the ability to give you something neither Karg nor Lavara is offering." He let a beat pass. "A choice. An actual choice about where you go next." The silence on the other end of the comm lasted long enough that Kirk wondered if he'd miscalculated. Then Koenig's voice came back, quieter than before, and stripped of the careful management that had characterized every previous exchange. "How long would that take?" "I don't know," Kirk said, "but Spock doesn't fail at problems like this. He finds answers or he finds reasons why answers are impossible, and in 3 years of working with him, I've never seen the second option." Another silence, shorter. "I need to address my people," Koenig said. "All of them. Whatever we decide, it gets decided together." He paused. "Can you give me 2 hours?" "I can give you whatever you need," Kirk said. The comm clicked off, and Kirk sat back in his command chair as Spock appeared at his shoulder with the quiet efficiency of a man who had been listening to every word and was already 3 steps ahead. "The guiding force analysis," Kirk said. "I have a hypothesis," Spock said. "I have been reluctant to present it because the evidence, while suggestive, remains incomplete." He paused. "However, given the developing tactical situation, incomplete evidence may be preferable to continued uncertainty. Tell me, the pattern of the moon's trajectory corrections corresponds with a precision I find difficult to attribute to coincidence, with the known gravitational influence maps of a specific phenomenon." Spock folded his hands. "Captain, are you familiar with the Taurian phenomenon? The spatial designation given to a region of space approximately 40 light-years from our current position, characterized by anomalous energy readings that Federation science has classified as unexplained for the past 11 years? Kirk looked at him. You're saying something in the Taurian region is pulling the moon. I am saying the mathematics are consistent with that hypothesis, Spock said carefully. I am also saying that the Taurian region is in the precise direction of the moon's current deceleration vector. He paused. And that it lies beyond the boundary of both Federation space and Klingon territory. He held Kirk's gaze. In unmapped space, which means that whatever Karg and Livara are offering, their cartographic knowledge, in their political protection, it stops being relevant precisely where the moon is going. Kirk stared at the view screen for a long moment. So we're the only ones who can help them, he said. We are the only ones with warp capability, scientific resources, and no territorial interest in the destination, Spock confirmed. Yes, Captain, I believe we are. Outside, the moon continued its patient, ancient drift towards something that had been waiting for it, with a purpose that 3 centuries of human science had not yet learned to name. The all-hands address on Moonbase Alpha lasted 37 minutes. Kirk didn't hear it. Koenig had closed the comm channel with the privacy of a man who understood that some conversations belonged only to the people they concerned. But he could imagine it, had imagined it, sitting in his command chair through those 37 minutes with the particular quality of stillness that came from respecting a process he had no right to interrupt. 311 people in a pressurized installation on a wandering moon, gathering in corridors and recreation areas and medical bays and technical sections, listening to their commander tell them what they faced and what was possible and what the choice was. He wondered what Koenig said. He suspected it was honest and direct and offered no false comfort, and that the people listening had heard enough of both honesty and its absence to know the difference. When the channel reopened, it was not Koenig's voice. It was Maya's. Captain Kirk, the commander asks that you and Mr. Spock beam down immediately. Please bring your navigational data on the Taurian region. A pause with something in it that Kirk couldn't immediately classify. Not urgency exactly, but the quality of compressed time, of events that had begun moving faster than their container. There's something else, something our sensors have just detected that you need to see. Kirk and Spock materialized in Alpha's technical section to find a room that had been transformed in the 2 hours since their last visit. Additional personnel had been brought in, technicians and scientists working at every station with the focused intensity of people who had been given a specific problem and were applying everything they had to it. Bergman was at the central display, and the star map that had occupied it previously had been replaced by something considerably more complex. Anna Koenig was standing at the center of it with an expression that Kirk was learning to read. The particular set of his jaw and steadiness of his eyes that meant he had made a decision and made peace with its weight and was now operating entirely in the present tense. My people voted, Koenig said, without preamble, unanimously. He held Kirk's gaze. We want to know what's moving us, and we want the choice you offered. Kirk nodded once. Then let's find it. Before that, Koenig said, look at this. Bergman stepped aside from the central display. What it showed stopped Spock in the middle of his approach with the completeness of a man whose forward motion has been interrupted by genuine surprise. A rare enough event that the people in the room who knew him registered it immediately. The sensor data was unambiguous. In the 6 hours since the Klingon and Romulan vessels had taken position near the moon, a third factor had entered the region. Not a ship, not a vessel of any classifiable type, but an energy phenomenon of extraordinary scale. It had been growing at the edge of sensor range for approximately 4 hours, building with the patient accumulation of something that operated on a timeline longer than tactical situations. It was centered on the moon's projected trajectory. It was, by every metric Alpha's sensors could apply, directly ahead. We've been watching it develop, Bergman said. At first I thought it was sensor interference from the Klingon vessel's warp engines. Then I thought it was a spatial anomaly consistent with the earlier trajectory anomalies. He looked at the display with the expression of a physicist who had arrived at a conclusion that his instruments supported and his intuition resisted. But it's neither of those things. What is it? Kirk asked. It's a response, Maya said from her station. She said it quietly and with the careful precision of someone choosing words that are accurate rather than comfortable. The energy signature is reactive. It's been growing in direct correlation with the increased activity around the moon. The arrival of the Enterprise, the Klingon vessel, the Romulan scout, the transporter beacon incident. Every escalation in this region has produced a corresponding escalation in the phenomenon. It's aware of what's happening here, Kirk said. It's aware of something, Koenig said. Whether that maps onto what we understand as awareness, he shook his head. Victor. The energy pattern, Bergman said, is consistent with what our records classify as the signature of the force that has been guiding the moon. The same fundamental frequency, enormously amplified. He looked at Spock. Your Taurian region hypothesis, Mr. Spock. This phenomenon, it's not coming from the Taurian region. Spock was already at a sensor station, his fingers moving with focused precision. Clarify. It's not pulling the moon toward the Taurian region, Bergman said. The Taurian region is a waypoint, a navigational marker. He took a breath. The phenomenon ahead of us. This is the destination. It has come to meet us. He paused. Or more precisely, it has come because of what's gathered around us. The additional ships, the conflict. Whatever is guiding this moon did not intend for it to arrive, accompanied by a Klingon battlecruiser and a Romulan intelligence operative. The room was very still. It's reacting to the threat to Alpha, Carter said from the doorway, where he had appeared without Kirk noticing. A pilot's instinct for positioning, present at the edges of events. That's one interpretation, Bergman said carefully. It's protecting them, McCoy said. He had arrived beside Carter with his medical kit and the expression of a man whose scientific framework had just accommodated something that required expansion. Whatever it is, it's been moving this moon for 3 years. It's invested. And now it's responding to the fact that other powers are trying to claim what it's been shepherding. Doctor, Spock said, that interpretation requires attributing intent and emotion to a phenomenon we have not yet characterized. Spock, McCoy said, I've been a doctor for 20 years. I know protective behavior when I see it. Kirk looked at Koenig. Koenig looked back. Your call, Captain, Koenig said, and the words, the first time he had deferred to Kirk's judgment on anything, landed with the weight of what they represented. You know this universe better than I do. Kirk turned to the display, to the growing energy phenomenon ahead, us to the sensor readings that described something enormous and purposeful, and not hostile, but not patient either. Something that had been shepherding 311 people across the stars for 3 years, and had now encountered competition for its charge, and was, in whatever way such a thing expressed itself, objecting. We need to get the Klingon and Romulan vessels out of this region, Kirk said. Now, before that phenomenon decides that proximity equals threat. Karg won't withdraw on a request, Spock said. No, Kirk agreed. He'll withdraw on a reason. He moved to the comm panel. Get me both vessels simultaneously. Karg and Lavera on the same channel. Uhura's voice from the Enterprise patched through Alpha's system. Channel open, Captain. Both faces appeared. Karg's broad martial assessment, Mike Lavara's precise intelligence calculation, side by side on Alpha's main screen in a juxtaposition that under other circumstances might have been diplomatically catastrophic. Commanders, Kirk said, I'm transmitting sensor data from Moonbase Alpha's array. Please review it before responding. He nodded to Maya, who transferred the feed. He watched both faces as they received it, Karg's expression shifting through rapid tactical calculation, Lavara's through the faster, more controlled recalibration of an intelligence professional absorbing an unexpected variable. It was Karg who spoke first. What is that? We don't know yet, Kirk said. What we know is that it is large, it is reactive to conflict in this region, and it appears to have a specific relationship with Moonbase Alpha that predates our arrival by approximately 3 years. He let that register. I am not ordering either of you to withdraw. I am telling you that an unknown phenomenon of this scale, which has demonstrated the ability to move a moon across 14 light-years of interstellar space, is currently responding to the presence of armed vessels in this region with escalating energy output. He paused. I leave the tactical assessment to your respective judgments. Lavara spoke, her voice carrying the flat precision of someone recalculating in real time. The phenomenon's energy output in the last 10 minutes has increased by a factor of... She checked something off screen. 47. Correct, Kirk said. A silence. The Tal Shiar, Lavara said carefully. Air does not engage with phenomena of unknown capability without adequate preparation. She held Kirk's gaze. We will withdraw to a monitoring distance. Karg was quiet for 3 full seconds, an eternity for a Klingon in a tactical situation. Kirk watched the calculation happening behind his eyes. The warrior's assessment of whether the unknown phenomenon constituted a worthy opponent or an unquantifiable risk, and the commander's understanding that unquantifiable risk was the one category that even Klingon honor didn't require you to charge into without information. A Klingon does not retreat, Karg said. I'm suggesting a tactical reposition, Kirk said, to a distance from which your sensors can fully characterize what you're facing before engaging it. Another silence. Then, the Empire's interest in Moonbase Alpha is noted for the record. He looked at Koenig directly, not Kirk. Commander, this conversation is not finished. No, Koenig agreed, it isn't. Both channels closed. On Alpha's long-range sensors, both vessels began moving. Lavara's scout immediately and with efficient grace, Karg's battlecruiser with the slower, deliberate movement of a withdrawal being performed at a speed that preserved dignity. The region around the moon cleared, and the phenomenon ahead pulsed, once with the quality of something that had been holding itself in readiness, and had now, in some way that instruments could measure but not fully describe, eased. It noticed, Carter said quietly. Yes, Bergman said, or it did. Koenig stood at the center of his command post and looked at the display. At the phenomenon ahead, at the cleared space around his moon, at the Enterprise holding steady at its position. And Kirk, watching him, saw the moment when 3 years of sustained crisis, of impossible decisions made alone in the small hours, with everything on the line, met something that might be called, with caution and without sentimentality, the possibility of resolution. Mr. Spock, Koenig said, addressing the Vulcan directly for the first time without the mediation of Kirk between them. You said you find answers or reasons why answers are impossible. That is accurate, Spock said. Koenig gestured at the display. What is that? Spock looked at the sensor data for a long moment. I do not yet know, he said. Sure, but I intend to find out. He paused. With your permission, Commander, I would like to begin immediately. Koenig looked at him, then at Kirk, then back at the display. You have it, he said. Spock worked for 6 hours without pause. This was not unusual for Spock. Kirk had watched him work for considerably longer on problems of lesser consequence. But the quality of this particular sustained effort was different from the concentrated efficiency that characterized his normal scientific investigation. There was something in it that Kirk, who had learned to read Spock across years of close proximity, could only describe as reverence. Not the emotional reverence of a human confronting something sacred, but the Vulcan equivalent, the absolute, consuming engagement of a mind that had encountered a problem genuinely worthy of its full capacity. Bergman worked beside him for all 6 hours, and the two of them developed across that time. The wordless shorthand of scientists who have found a common language in mathematics and no longer need the scaffolding of social convention to communicate within it. They finished each other's equations. They disagreed 3 times with the clean, precise disagreements of people who respect each other's reasoning enough to challenge it directly, and each time the disagreement produced something better than either position had been alone. Koenig did not sleep. Kirk, who had returned to the Enterprise twice for consultation and come back both times, suspected Koenig had not slept properly in years, that he had long since reconfigured his relationship with rest into something functional rather than restorative, a maintenance protocol rather than a surrender. They sat together in Alpha's commissary at the 4-hour mark, ate over the bitter approximate coffee, while Spock and Bergman worked 30 meters away and talked in the way that two people talk when they have moved past the architecture of negotiation into something more direct. You would have done the same thing, Kirk said. In my position, with a wandering moon in your space and 311 people who needed something you could provide. Probably, Koenig said. I'd also have pushed harder than you did. You noticed. I notice everything, Captain. It's what keeps my people alive. He turned his coffee cup slowly in his hands. You held back. Several times, situations where you had the authority and the capability to override my position, and you chose not to. He looked at Kirk steadily. Why? Kirk considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. Because you were right, he said. Not about everything, but about the essential thing, about what Alpha is and what it owes to the people who built it by surviving in it. He paused. Starfleet trains us to think of authority as a tool for producing good outcomes. But authority applied to the wrong situation produces outcomes that look good on a report and feel wrong in the room. He looked at his cup. You've been in the room for 3 years. I arrived this afternoon. Koenig was quiet for a moment. Helena said something about you after your first visit. What did she say? She said you reminded her of you. He said it simply without elaboration, and the compliment, because it was a compliment in its understated way, was more meaningful for its precision. At the 6-hour mark, Spock called them back to the technical section. The display had been transformed again. The star map was gone, replaced by something that was not quite a scientific diagram and not quite anything else. A visual representation of the energy phenomenon that Spock and Bergman had constructed from sensor data, theoretical modeling, and what Bergman, with characteristic intellectual honesty, described as informed extrapolation. It was vast on the screen and complex and beautiful in the way that things are beautiful when they are exactly what they need to be and nothing else. We have a characterization, Spock said, not a complete understanding. Complete understanding may require research spanning years, but a characterization sufficient to answer Commander Koenig's essential question. The room gathered. Koenig, Kirk, Helena Russell, Maya Carter, Bergman stepping back from the display to let Spock present what they had built together. The phenomenon is, Spock began, and paused in a way that told Kirk he was choosing the next word with exceptional care. An entity, not in the biological sense, not in any sense that Federation xenobiology currently has adequate language to describe. It exists as a distributed energy consciousness, aware, purposeful, and operating on a temporal scale that makes individual human lifespans equivalent to what we would consider brief moments. How old is it? Russell asked. Our best estimate, based on the decay patterns of the spatial regions it has traversed, is approximately 11 million years, Bergman said, on with the voice of a man who had spent his career being surprised by the universe and had not yet exhausted his capacity for it. The room absorbed that. It found the moon, Spock continued, during the initial displacement event, the breakaway, as Commander Koenig terms it. What our analysis suggests is that the explosion that separated the moon from Earth's orbit was not, as Alpha's records assumed, a contained industrial accident that produced an unanticipated magnetic flux reaction. He looked at Koenig directly. The energy release of the breakaway event produced a signature that this entity detected across interstellar distances, a signature it recognized. Recognized as what? Koenig said. As a call, Spock said. Not intentional, not deliberate, but functionally equivalent to one. From the entity's perspective, he indicated the display, the specific energy signature of the nuclear detonation, combined with the electromagnetic resonance profile of the moon's mineral composition, produced a pattern that this entity associates with, he paused again, emergence, the beginning of something. In its 11 million years of existence, it has responded to 4 such events. The moon's breakaway was the 5th. It came to see what was beginning, Maya said softly. And then it stayed, Bergman added, because what it found, the survivors, the community, the extraordinary resilience of people who should not have been able to sustain themselves and did, matched something in its experiential memory, something it valued. It's been protecting us, Carter said. Not a question this time, a recognition. The trajectory corrections, Spock confirmed. Every course adjustment, every narrow escape from stellar hazards and alien threats that Alpha's records document as fortunate coincidence. The entity has been guiding the moon along a path that maximizes survival probability while exposing its occupants to experiences it considers formative. He folded his hands. In the most direct translation our analysis can produce, it has been over 3 years, educating you, preparing you. For what? Koenig said. For whatever lies at the destination it has been building toward for the past 7 months, Spock said. He indicated a point on the display. Beyond Federation space, beyond Klingon territory, beyond the edge of anything charted by any civilization currently known to Starfleet. Our analysis cannot determine what exists there. Yes, the entity's own communication, such as we have been able to interpret it, suggests only that it is significant. He paused. And that it believes Moonbase Alpha is ready for it. The silence that followed was vast and clean, like the silence between stars. Koenig stood at the center of it, and Kirk watched him absorb everything. 11 million years of patient guidance, a breakaway that was not an accident, but a recognition. 3 years of impossible survival that had been, beneath its surface of random catastrophe, a preparation. His face did not show what most people's faces show when they receive information of this magnitude. It showed instead the expression of a man who had suspected something like this for a long time and had disciplined himself not to name it until he had evidence, and who was now, when in possession of the evidence, simply allowing himself to know what he had always half known. "Can we communicate with it?" Koenig asked. "Professor Bergman and I have established a rudimentary exchange," Spock said. "Primarily mathematical, pattern recognition and response, sufficient to confirm the characterization I have described." He paused. "I asked it one question directly, Commander, on your behalf. I hope you will consider that appropriate given the circumstances." Koenig looked at him. "What did you ask?" "I asked whether Moonbase Alpha's people could choose their destination, whether the guidance it had provided for 3 years was a compulsion or a suggestion." Spock held Koenig's gaze with the particular quality of attention he reserved for moments that mattered. Its response required 40 minutes to decode and was expressed in a mathematical language of considerable complexity. "Professor Bergman and I are confident in our translation." "Which is?" Koenig said. Spock said, "It has always been a suggestion. The choice was always yours. It simply made certain you survived long enough to make it freely." The room was very still. Helena Russell made a sound, not quite a breath, not quite a word. And Carter looked at the ceiling with the expression of a pilot who has just been told that the instrument readings he trusted for 3 years were accurate, that the ground is where he thought it was, that he can land. Maya stood with her eyes closed for a moment, and on her face was something that Kirk suspected was grief and relief in equal measure. The last of her species. When guided across the stars by something that valued what she was, Bergman laughed. It was a short sound, surprised out of him. The laugh of a physicist who has spent years working a problem from the wrong direction and has just seen the correct one. "It made certain we survived," he repeated. 3 years, 47 dead, everything we've endured. And it made certain we survived. He shook his head slowly, without bitterness. "I'd very much like to have a longer conversation with it." "You will," Koenig said. He turned to Kirk. "Captain, Commander, I'm going to need time to talk to my people again, to explain what they've just become part of." He held Kirk's gaze. "And then we're going to move." "Toward the destination," Kirk said. "Yes." He paused. "The Enterprise can't follow us there." "No," Kirk agreed. "It's outside our operational range and our mandate." He paused. "But I can give you everything we have. Spock's complete analysis, our stellar cartography up to the boundary, medical supplies, technical components, anything the Enterprise can spare that Alpha can use." Koenig nodded slowly. "And Karg and Livara?" "I'll handle Karg and Livara," Kirk said. "You have my word." Something in Koenig's expression shifted. The final small adjustment of a mechanism that has been held under tension for a very long time and has now, carefully and deliberately, been allowed to ease. "I believe you," he said, and then after a pause, "That took longer to say than I expected." Kirk almost smiled. "I noticed." They spent the next 14 hours in transfer operations. Eagle flights, ferrying supplies from the Enterprise. Spock completing his documentation of the entity's communication patterns for Bergman to continue developing. McCoy and Russell conducting a final medical consultation that lasted 6 hours and ended with the two of them standing in Alpha's medical center, talking about something that had nothing to do with medicine, in the way that people talk when they have found an unexpected peer and are aware that the conversation has a fixed endpoint. Kirk spoke to Karg twice and Livara once. The Klingon conversation was longer and required the invocation of the entity's demonstrated capability in terms that a Klingon commander could receive as tactical reality rather than mysticism. Karg withdrew to the neutral zone boundary with the formal statement that the Empire's interest in Moonbase Alpha was noted, filed, and pending. It was, for a Klingon, a remarkably flexible position. Kirk suspected that Karg had found, in Koenig, someone he genuinely respected, and that respect had made room for pragmatism. Livara's conversation was shorter. She simply said, "The Tal Shiar will be watching." "I know," Kirk said. "We are always watching," she said. and closed the channel, and her scout vessel moved toward the neutral zone with the quiet efficiency of an intelligence operation that had achieved less than intended and more than nothing and would, in the way of intelligence operations, file everything and wait. The final hours before separation had a quality that Kirk had encountered before. At the end of missions that had begun as emergencies and concluded as something less classifiable, when in the space between resolution and departure, where the full weight of what had happened settles into the people who experienced it. He spent the last of those hours with Koenig on the surface of the moon, not in the command center or the technical section or the commissary, but outside, suited, standing on the gray regolith in the long shadow of an eagle on its landing pad, looking at the stars with the particular clarity that comes from standing in vacuum with nothing between you and the universe but a faceplate. The entity's energy phenomenon was visible to the naked eye now, ahead of the moon's trajectory. A soft luminescence at the edge of perception, the color of something that didn't have a color, patient and vast and neither beckoning nor threatening, simply present in the way that things are present when they have been waiting long enough that waiting has become their nature. She told me something, Koenig said. His voice came through the suit comm with a slight compression that made it sound to Kirk like a transmission from a distance greater than the few feet that separated them. Helena, last night after McCoy left, he paused. She said that for 2 years she's been telling herself that the random nature of our journey was the hardest part. Not knowing where we were going, not having a destination. He looked at the luminescence ahead. She said now that she knows something has been guiding us. The hardest part is different. What is it now? Kirk asked. Trusting it, Koenig said. Knowing that we've been led somewhere specific for a reason we don't fully understand yet, or by something 11 million years old that found us worth the effort. He was quiet for a moment. It's easier to survive random catastrophe. There's no expectation in randomness. You just endure it. He looked at the stars. Purpose is harder. Purpose implies you have to be worthy of it. Kirk stood beside him in the silence of the moon's surface, the absolute silence of vacuum, broken only by the sound of their own breathing, and thought about that, about the difference between surviving and being chosen to survive, about the weight of significance versus the clean, terrible freedom of meaninglessness. In my experience, Kirk said finally, the beings that get chosen for things are rarely the ones who feel ready for them. Koenig looked at him. Is that from a regulation? No, Kirk said. That's from paying attention. Something moved in Koenig's expression, brief and unguarded in the way that expressions are sometimes unguarded when people are in spacesuits and looking at stars and have temporarily suspended the management of how they appear. It was not quite a smile. It was the thing that exists in the space before a smile, in the moment when the decision to smile has been made but not yet executed, when the face is still deciding whether the feeling deserves the expression. Walk with me, Koenig said. They walked along the Terminator line where Alpha's sunlight met his shadow, two suited figures in the ancient gray landscape, and Koenig talked with a directness he had not allowed himself in any of the formal conversations of the previous day, about the breakaway, about the first weeks when the psychological losses had been almost worse than the physical ones, about the moment 6 months in, when he had understood that going home was not a plan, but a fantasy, and had made the decision, alone and at 3 a.m. in his commander's quarters, to stop orienting the community toward rescue and start orienting it toward survival. About the 47 dead, each one a specific face and name and story. About the moment Maya had joined them and what her presence had meant, not just scientifically, not just tactically, but to a community that had been sealed inside its own humanity and suddenly found itself enlarged by something beyond it. Kirk listened.